It was either going to prison or dying. I hate this. I hate myself. I hate my life. Woke up the next day in a rehab at 15, and that kid is kind of dead to me. And there was just everything about it that screamed, don't do it. It kind of like pissed us off a little bit that brands like Evian and Coca-Cola were allowing this to happen. And we were just like, why has no one put water in a can? Basically, Cano looked like it was owned by Coca-Cola, but it was actually just, we were just doing it in my mum and dad's kitchen. Have you got any inside information about Selfridges? We basically just said yes to Selfridges and we had nothing. You know, it was petrifying for us. It's like they had everything more than us. Cano Water's going to be finished in a year. Like, fuck you. We're going to do this. And within like 6 weeks, we basically...
Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So we hit you with a big question. Okay, we're going to kick off the day. Who are you and what problem do you solve?
So I am Josh White, CEO and co-founder of Cano Water. And Cano Water was the world's first water in a can. And the reason we put water in a can is because we saw how much plastic pollution there was in the ocean. So the problem that we're solving is trying to remove plastic, as much plastic as we can from the ocean by raising enormous awareness and replacing plastic bottles with a more recyclable alternative.
There we go.
There we go.
So if young up and coming entrepreneurs are listening to this, from your journey, what symptoms might they be facing where they might relate or they might learn something? Why should they listen to the rest of the episode?
You know, I think that my journey is very unconventional. You know, I was a very troubled child who, you know, I'm riddled with ADHD and addictive tendencies. And, you know, I think if you want to hear about how someone who was definitely going down the wrong path sort of got out and turned their life around and continues to try and be the best version of themselves, even though, you know, hurdles arise every day, then yeah, the episode's definitely for you.
Well, take us back then. So when's the first thing, now you look back, everything's in hindsight, right, when you're a founder. So when you look back now, what are those first inklings of maybe I was going to take an unconventional path in my life?
From an entrepreneurial perspective, I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. I never thought I had it in me. I mean, years and years before every single person in the world was using the term imposter syndrome, you know, entrepreneurialism just wasn't in my DNA because I was such a troubled child. And I didn't think that really that I didn't know where I'd be. You know, I didn't really look at the future at that time. You know, I plan ahead now, and I kind of future-proof myself, and I sort of have a mental map of where I want to be in 10 years, and I kind of work towards that. Whereas when I was a kid, that just wasn't me. And I just sort of lived in today and expected tomorrow being a different day. But it's like that definition of insanity, you know, where like you expect different results and you're just doing the same thing. So, you know, I think that it was sort of a journey of probably like 8 to 10 years from where I was sort of 12 years old to 22, literally, where I went through so much trauma and had so many issues that I kind of learned so much about myself. And also, do you know what? I also made so many mistakes. So I think that, you know, failure, mistakes, all these things, learning from the fuck ups and the mistakes was massively important for my journey. So I think that, you know, it was to get to that place, it kind of was when I was like 18, 19, where I started a business in music because I'm a DJ. I've been DJing since I was sort of 10, 11 years old. And this is actually the same with Cano Water as well. It was never started as a job. It was started as a passion, a love, an interest. And I think that's very much where my entrepreneurialism sort of started, is that I learned very, very quickly that I never wanted to be in property or banking or recruitment. I didn't have it in me. I mean, all my friends went into those I had to do something that I was completely and utterly obsessed with, which is kind of where my ADHD brain comes into it, because at school, I couldn't listen to English class, I couldn't listen to maths, I couldn't listen to science. But if I was in music or art, I was wired in. So I learned very, very early on in life that like whatever I was going to do, it had to be something that I absolutely loved and had a huge amount of passion for.
There's a couple of times that troubled and trauma have come up. I don't know how comfortable you are giving us the background.
Very comfortable, as long as it helps others. I think that,
sure.
it's important to be open.
So tell us what you can tell us then that might help us inform who you are.
Yeah, so I think that, just came from a nice family, very dysfunctional family though. Didn't have a bad upbringing at all. My dad sort of gave us, everything that he could. He came from nothing, literally, and lived in, a council estate for, his whole childhood, and similar to me, found a passion and, was able to provide for our family. At a very young age, probably at about 8, 9, I knew that I was very different to other people just by like looking around at my peers. I was always very miserable, very sad. Didn't know why, didn't understand it. At that age, like, who's sad? You're just like, you're just a kid. And I think that I was always very, very confused, and also never satisfied, which is something as well that I didn't really understand. Started secondary school, got in a lot of trouble, always the class clown, so always trying to get attention. And I always knew that I had a problem, but I didn't know what the problem was. And then at the age of about 11 years old, after getting being on report at school and getting into trouble multiple times, I went to see a psychiatrist who basically diagnosed me with a term that I'd never heard of, or no one had ever heard of, called ADHD, which, like, who doesn't have ADHD these days? It's like the coolest thing in the world. At that time, it was definitely not it was being diagnosed with it and understanding what it was actually horrible, because at that time, like, any research you did, it was like hyperactivity, troubled, this, and it basically put me in a category. And then from then, my whole sort of childhood sort of spiraled out of control, where I was just angry, and anger was a massive part of my childhood. And what came from that was an alcohol addiction, essentially. I started drinking at about 12 years old, and when I had a drink, it was kind of like it numbed all the pain. And there was a lot of stuff going on in my family life, a lot of people getting ill. Any single time something like that happened, I knew that if I drank, the pain would just disappear. So I kind of just started drinking. And, I didn't know I had an addictive personality. At quite a young age, I did know that my family, there was a lot of addiction. One of my cousins is clean off of heroin and has been for about 30 years. And sadly, one of my other cousins passed away of heroin. I actually didn't meet her, but I was always, as a young age, my parents were always like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And I remember at 13 years old going to a hospital with my dad for just like, I can't remember, I was ill or I broke or something, I can't remember. And I saw this drunk guy run into a wall. And I remember saying to my dad, like, I will never, ever be that person. Like, it made me feel ill. And I, like, always remember that time. And like, fast forward for the next sort of like from the age of like 13 to 15, like I became that guy. I didn't know anything about addiction, and for 2 years basically my life went from just being a harmless kid, to basically just being like a full-blown alcoholic, drinking sort of 2-3 bottles of vodka a day, not understanding why, but apart from the fact that I just hated my life and didn't understand what was going on in my mind. Just getting in trouble at school, suspended all the time, getting in trouble with the police, and hanging around with the wrong people. And that was kind of like, it wasn't that I wanted to be that person. I was never a horrible person. I didn't know what my purpose was in life, or to be honest with you, it was either going to prison or dying. And I didn't care. I didn't care. But at the same time, I didn't know why, didn't understand why. Fast forward 15 years old, paralytic, got home and woke up the next day in a rehab at 15. And it was petrifying. It was the most scariest time ever. No phone, no one to really talk to, in a rehab with 40, 50, 60-year-olds who I had no idea who they were, strangers. and sitting in groups. And I was in a rehab it was the only rehab in the country that basically adolescents could go to. So it was me and one other kid basically. And, you know, I grew up in a nice area and around nice people. And now I'm in rehab with like the worst people, literally the worst people. That's sort of what I perceived at that age as the worst people. And, you know, it was the most difficult time in my life, you know, and it was a time where I didn't want to be around. I didn't see past tomorrow, and I didn't want to because I didn't believe in myself. And, you know, essentially I was in there for about a month and I learned everything really. I learned about addiction. You know, I was sitting in group therapy with people that were, as I said, like 30, 40 years older than me plus, and hearing them talk, and I'm sitting there angry, not talking and just hating everyone and everything. And I'm hearing these people talk about their minds and what's going on in their heads. And I'm literally like, I'm trying to ignore it, but I'm hearing me. I'm hearing my story. I'm hearing like, I can't stop drinking. I can't do this. I can't do that. It's like I physically can't stop. And I learned all about addiction. And I also started to hear about like people's superpowers. And then people started to also talk about ADHD and things like that. And, you know, as much as I didn't want to hear, I knew at that point that I was an addict. And I came out of rehab and it made everything worse because I was just like, at 15 years old when all of my mates are going out and having fun, you know, I'm just stuck. I've got ADHD, I've got addiction, you know, I'm not happy. And it kind of just, for the next 3 years, from 15 to 18, 19, I basically just got in serious trouble. I was sober, but I just was angry. That's essentially, that was it. So 3 years and of basically, just getting in serious amounts of trouble and doing stupid things. At 18 years old, I started an events company. One thing I will say, and I think this is important, anyone with ADHD, it's like one of the most important things is really to find a hobby. And my dad always bought me things that I needed, not that I wanted. And he bought me my first pair of decks, my DJ decks, when I was 11 years old, because I'm obsessed with music, art, graffiti, hip hop, like culture of real sort of like American hip hoppy culture. And I've always loved that from like a kid. And, you know, within those few years, I was just getting constantly suspended from school and getting into trouble. And all I had was DJing. I like taught myself how to DJ. And I would spend all night literally just DJing. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I was so obsessed with trying to learn and be a good DJ because I was so obsessed with some hip hop DJs. And, that sort of took me into the world of music, started an events company for like under 18s, putting on sort of like dubstep and drum and bass events in the UK. Got into business with like some big grime artists, like Boy Better Know and people like that, who we basically did like tours for those artists. And it's funny, if I look back now, like one of the events that we put on in London, like the lineup would cost way over £1 million, you know, like literally like Skepta, Dizzy Rascal, Wiley, like the biggest people in grime. Yeah. This was before grime exploded. And that was the first time ever where I actually felt like, oh my God, I've got purpose. And I'm kind of I'm still fucked up, but I'm doing something that I love. And I did that for about 1.5 years and it was phenomenal. It was just, I wanted to do this forever and I thought it would last forever. And then just sort of, my life was always in like, it would always be like something good would happen and then it would go 10 steps back. Something good would happen 10 steps back. And I always just had this mentality of like, nothing's going to go right. But I would keep going. And I always worked as a kid and I always wanted to do something. But this was like, wow, this is it. This is me. I didn't know that this was entrepreneurialism, but I just kind of like, was like, I love this. And I had a purpose to wake up to. And then literally within the space of of about 2 years, the whole thing it was going up and up. We were putting 10,000 people into venues, and literally overnight the whole business just collapsed because under 18 events basically got shut down in London. And then I had a severe family traumatic experience where my younger brother got diagnosed with cancer, basically, he was 12 years old. It was like the worst possible thing that could ever happen. But that 10 steps back, I was kind of used to it. And like, we'll talk about resilience within business, because by the time I started Cano Water, nothing could break me. I was kind of like, I was so resilient. And then, my brother was in hospital for a year. He's fine now, thank God. And I kind of like was back in that place of like confusion. And I just was, I was unhappy, but it was kind of like, nothing can break me. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger kind of vibe. There were so many things that weren't going right in my life. But at the same time, there was this feeling of, I really enjoyed what I did. And I was DJing at this point, DJing all across the country. I was DJing to hundreds of thousands of people at unis and the biggest clubs in the whole of, the whole of the country. And I was having a lot of fun, but I knew that wouldn't satisfy me for long. So I was kind of looking for my next venture and what I would do, because there was something in me, and this is where addiction and ADHD really do work. Like, this is where the superpower comes in. It's like, I need something. I need something to make me feel that feeling. And once you felt it, it's like a drug. It's like, a lot of people in recovery in AA meetings, which I've been going to for the past 20 years, they'll always say like they're chasing that high, that high. And what I kind of learned is that if I can chase that good high, and find that feeling that I had when I was had my events company, it could lead to being better. And at this point in my life, I was smoking 40 cigarettes a day. I was DJing all across the country. All I was eating was McDonald's. It was horrendous. And I was drinking literally 10 Red Bulls every day. And I would look terrible. I was just, I just looked terrible. And I remember looking at myself one day in the mirror and I was just like, I hate this. I hate myself. I hate my life. And I just stopped. I stopped it all. I made a rule. I'm never going to drink a Red Bull ever again in my life. I'm never going to smoke another cigarette. And I'm never, ever going to eat McDonald's, literally. And I was about 20, I think I was 21 years old. And I don't know. I think it was the tools that I'd learned to stop drinking. And what I'd learned in my AA meetings and from all the people that have got clean, that helped me basically sort of, everything that I'd learned led me to that. And that was the turning point in my life. Like it really was. That was a point that I vividly remember where I was like, I don't want to be this person anymore. I'm going to put that in the past, because I think most people live in the past. And I was like, I'm just going to concentrate on my future. And that was like, as I said, from the age of sort of like 11, 12 to 20, 21, that was kind of just, I say in other podcasts, it was pre-me. Like I was born, it's like born in the Royal Navy. I was born at like 21. And that's when like I went to Thailand with the boys. And obviously the idea came about.
Oh God, I'm so tired. I've just been talking to qualified prospects all day without any wait time.
How have you been doing it? Because I've been cold calling people on my mobile, and I reckon I've spoke to one person.
No. Stop that right now and use Nooks.ai.
Why? What does Nooks do?
It finds me the right people to call, and it calls them, and it connects with them over and over and over again.
So you're saying it's Nooks.ai, and I can just be speaking to qualified decision makers all the time?
No other better connection rate.
Wow, Nooks.ai. That sounds like an emotional roller coaster. Like you've lived more lives in 20 years than most people ever live. So if we sat down with the Josh just before the idea of Cano, so just the night before. It's not even an idea. What would that Josh be saying about his ambition and his future?
There would be no ambition and no future. You know, it was just sort of anger and living in the past. And I think that it's so easy to live in the past. It's so easy. And, you know, I spend a lot of my life helping people with ADHD and addiction and business, whatever. And I think a lot of people find it very, very difficult to forget things that have happened in the past and think that it's going to continue to happen. And as I said right at the beginning, like that's that definition of insanity. If you carry on, if something isn't working, you physically have to change it. And, you know, we'll get into this, but my resilience and my and the person I am today is all through comfort zones. I'm a massive believer that that breaking boundaries and barriers, and getting through the comfort zone is just one of the hardest things ever to do. And once you've done it, you become unstoppable. Literally unstoppable. But there's too many people that just won't. They just can't. But they can. But they physically, their brain will tell them they can't. So that person before, that person just, they wouldn't go outside of their comfort zone because they just kept on thinking that nothing would change. I still, to this day, I can't understand how I've got to where I've got to. And listen, I have people messaging me the whole time, and I always have to caveat this. Oh my God, like, you know, I've heard about your journey, and I've got ADHD, and I want to be you, or, you know, I'm an addict and I want to be you, and I always have to caveat it with like, I'm still dealing with it. You know, like I'm very proud of where I am, but at the same time, like, I still deal with this mind every day, but it's the comfort zone thing is a really, really important thing. And I think that that kid was broken, bruised, battered, didn't think that he could be anything. And it's crazy what is around the corner. Like, I don't know if you've seen that picture of the guy digging. You know, he's digging and digging and digging, the gold or whatever is there, and he stops just before, and it's like, that is, you know, that is kind of like, that is my journey, and I don't allow myself to stop now, really. Sometimes it's healthy to stop, but like, I don't allow myself to stop because my, you know, that I look back at that kid. Do you know what I mean? I'm my biggest, that period in my life is like my biggest fear. It's my biggest fear. So yeah, that kid would be proud now, but it's kind of like that kid is kind of dead to me, really, in the most, you know, in the most positive way possible, because I have to forget the past. But at the same time, I don't regret anything because I'm a firm believer that I wouldn't be the person I am today without any of that. And you know what, I go on a lot of business podcasts and it's always about business. And actually, like, I wouldn't even have a business if it wasn't for that period. So I don't regret any of that, because I actually think that without that, I wouldn't even be able to be helping people with ADHD addiction and helping that accidental entrepreneur that basically just never thought that they could ever be, you know, successful or amount to something.
It's refreshing, because we interview a lot of people and we listen to a lot of podcasts, and a lot of the time it's, I always knew I was going to do it. So it's like, it's a real kind of juxta. So I've been thinking about the kind of the idea of obviously Cano, and the way that I imagine it is, you've just finished a DJ set, it's 5 a.m, the sun's coming up in Thailand, you walk in across a gorgeous beach, a plastic bottle rolls up at your feet, you pick it up and you think, I'm going to change the fucking world. Yeah. How far off is that?
So far off. So far off.
What's tell us about the ideology of it.
Like, didn't care about sustainability. You know, I always say like I was part of the problem rather than the solution. You know, like I grew up in an area where like you don't see any plastic pollution. No one cares about plastic pollution. Everyone's buying plastic bottles. And, you know, went to Thailand with my two best mates. And, you know, it's important to talk about them as well, because the three of us are quite just like dysfunctional people, dysfunctional kids who basically just never really did well at school, had our own battles, you know, got in a lot of trouble and did some stupid shit. But we were really creative, always obsessed with, like, as I said, like music, culture, fashion, you know, whether it's me with my DJing and art. You know, I went to art school as well. And Perry, my other co-founder, you know, is one of the greatest designers, you know, I've ever met. And, you know, funny story, like we used to, at my family home, we just used to literally every year we would just graffiti my whole room. I mean, my parents absolutely hated us, but it was always a thing that like we would graffiti it every year, or just do like the maddest design of the room. And you know, I think that I look back at those times, and even though it was like, what on earth are you doing? It's like, these were the things that really kind of helped shape us. And then Ariel, my other partner as well, just like, you know, we all just came together as like people that just loved these things and loved culture. And, you know, one thing that is very, very similar to all of us. And when I was a kid, no one could tell me what to do. Which was bad as a kid, but like I always did what I wanted to do. And I was always very like, I didn't care what people thought. I chose what I wore. I chose what music I listened to. I never ever followed anyone or anything. And I was always an innovator rather than a copycat. You know, I from the earliest of times, like everyone would get this, I would get that. Everyone would do that, I would do that. Everyone would go into this job, I went into DJing. And I was always, there was something about it that I really loved. I loved being there was something that I loved about being the different person, and doing what I wanted to do. So I'd be listening to music a year before anyone would be listening to that music. Or I'd be wearing things. And I think that it's the same with the others, you know, and we kind of, that's what really brought us together, is we would find things before they became cool, and talk about it. So we went on a lads holiday, you know, we just did a normal Thailand trip that most people do. And, you know, just came across so much plastic. And it was honestly like, I'd love to tell you that, like, you know, it's this glamorous experience, but it wasn't. It was just like, how is this happening? And why are the biggest brands in the world not talking about this? Like, no one's talking about it. It was a bit of like an obsession. Like, we know everyone that comes to Thailand, but like no one's talking about it. And it kind of like pissed us off a little bit that brands like Evian and Coca-Cola were allowing this to happen. But at that point, we didn't think that we were going to come up with a business idea out of it. We just carried on with the trip. We always spoke about it, but as I said, like entrepreneurialism and environmentalism, it was kind of like, yeah, it wasn't. I hear a lot of stories, and it was very, very different. We just sort of got on with our lives, and I do think that 99% of people would never talk about that again. Maybe at like a family dinner, like, oh, did you see the plastic bottles? But we got back and we did kind of get a bit obsessed with like what we saw. And I think this is where like the ADHD comes in, and the addictive tendencies. Is we basically just, we kind of got to a point where we were like, we knew that we wanted to build something. We didn't know it was about that. We as friends, we were always talking about new ideas. And yeah, one night we basically just started talking about how, like, is there other alternatives to plastic bottles? And we started to do a lot of research, and, you know, we saw that glass is recyclable, but it smashes and it's heavy, it's expensive. We saw that cartons, like Oatly Tetra Pak cartons, are actually the worst. They're the most unrecyclable. When you try and recycle it, it's like really difficult to recycle it because it looks like it's actually more recyclable, but it's got paper, aluminium and plastic all fused inside of it. So it's actually the worst. You can't even recycle it. Then we saw this stat about cans, that 75% of all cans ever produced are just still in circulation. So any can that you've ever drunk from has probably been hundreds of thousands, if not millions of other cans. So like the cans that we're drinking from today, there's material in this that's been around since the 1800s. It's mental. It's just mental. And we were just like, why has no one put water in a can? And I think that, it's easy. It's easy to answer that. You can't see the water. You can't close it. People are going to think that it's taste of metal. There's a million reasons why no one would put water in a can. But I think it needed 3 dysfunctional idiots who basically just wouldn't take no as an answer and basically were so naive to basically, and who were obsessed with brand, to basically turn around and be like, you know what, we'll do it. Because we loved that no one had ever done it before. That excited us. We loved that it was different. That excited us. We loved that it had purpose through and through, because as I said, with my events company, it needed that purpose. I needed to see the Thailand thing before starting it. I needed to fall in love with it and be obsessed with it, and we couldn't get it off of our minds. I was sober and I was only drinking water at the time, and there was just everything about it that screamed "don't do it," which basically just made us want to do it. So we essentially, we became completely and utterly obsessed with how do we make this work and how do we make this happen. And what is funny, at every single stage you always think that that's the hardest part. And I remember being in this stage thinking it was the hardest part, because we called up not thousands, that's an exaggeration. We called up probably hundreds of different people and met with so many different people and family, friends and this and that, and no one understood what we were doing and why we were doing it, and everyone was telling us it was a really, really stupid idea. And everyone that we were calling in like the industry, like the biggest co-packers who put water into plastic bottles, like and everything, were just like, we're not going to do it. Like, and if even the can manufacturer who cans our cans, we had to get a minimum of 150,000 for still and 150,000 for sparkling, and that was like 60 grand. Like, we didn't have that money. So, but there was something that just kept us going, and I think it's because we were together and we had the same mission and we believed in it. And Perry had sent us a design that was not too dissimilar to this, and we just kind of fell in love with it, with the black and the white. And every no that we got spurred us on to like, fuck you, we're going to do this. That was like our mentality. And yeah, like, cut a long story short, we every time we hit a hurdle, we kind of went 10 steps back, kind of like what I said about my journey in life. We heard the no, and then we were like, okay, what can we do? So we went back to the drawing board, and I kind of like, when I talk about it, I kind of bring my childhood into this of like, let's keep going. And it's like, it is a mental battle. And essentially what we did is, our can manufacturer gave us some silver cans, 500 silver cans that didn't even have water in, because no one would put water in a can at this point. And what we did is we wrapped the cans basically, and after work, I was working in events and DJing, and the others were doing what they were doing, and we'd meet up after work and we'd just wrap these 500 cans, and we'd basically spray paint it and we'd make it look good and blah blah blah, and we wrapped it with like a film, and we basically created the most phenomenal deck. So basically Cano looked like it was owned by Coca-Cola, but it was actually just, we were just doing it in my mum and dad's kitchen at the time. And we found somewhere that would put water in the can. There was only one place in the world that would do it. I'm not even joking. And like, we'd called up so many people, and it's like that knocking down doors and like being so, like, it was like one of the last places that basically that said that they would do it. And we could have given up and not got there. And we also found this resealable lid on page 10 of Google, which the weirdest thing is, the only place in the world that put water in a can was literally about 20 miles away from the resealable lid place. It was just the weirdest thing ever. And things just started to sort of come together. And we basically just started sending emails out to like places. And we sent emails to like London Fashion Week and Selfridges and a few places, but we were aiming for those kinds of premium stores. That's where we believed it would work. And within like 6 weeks, we basically, it was like the stars had kind of aligned. London Fashion Week basically said to us that they want us to be the main sponsors for London Fashion Week the year after. I think it was like 2015, 2016. And then like we got this email from Selfridges. They basically said, you need to come in for a meeting urgently. So we went in for a meeting. And bearing in mind, I'm like 21, 22 years old at this point. I think, yeah, I was 22. And the guy basically sits there and he's like, have you got any inside information about Selfridges? And me and my business partner, Ariel, we were like, no. He was like, well, I've just moved from Harrods. I've been there for the past 10 years. I've just joined Selfridges. And the first thing that they've asked me to do is be the first retailer in the world to remove plastic from the shelves. And you emailed me that week. It was the weirdest thing. And he was like, and we love the brand. He was like, we want you to be the brand that we launch with. And we were like, great, yeah, we'll do it. And we walked around, after that meeting, I'll never forget, we walked around London, me and Ariel. We didn't talk for an hour. We were like, what the fuck is going on? But what the scariest part is that we didn't have any cans. We didn't have the money. We basically just said yes to Selfridges and we had nothing apart from a brochure and a can that basically had sparkling lemongrass in that. He was like, can I try that? We were like, oh, no, it's just a prototype at the moment. Like, so we were basically just, it was just so bootleg, like just not like, yeah, it was just looking back, it was so funny. But that was basically the start of Cano. And then we were introduced to some local investors who just loved us, who loved the fact that we, had sort of that naivety and that sort of that drive that they had as well, because they were 3 friends as well. And we basically got some investment from them. And that was kind of like, the start of the Cano journey and how, the product was formulated. And honestly, at that point, I thought that was the hardest part, and actually, it was the easiest.
Wow. I think before we move forward with the story, I want to just touch on ADHD again with this bit, because there will definitely be people listening. We've had lots of people on with ADHD. From what we hear, there's obviously, I suffer in these ways because of ADHD, and then other ways where it becomes a bit of a superpower.
Yeah.
So in that early stage, when you look back now, are there things that were only possible because of your ADHD?
100%. So one of the things that anyone with ADHD will know is you pick up things and you're obsessed. Like, honestly, if I told you some of the things that I've wanted to do, like I wanted to be a sax player once. I wanted to be like a golfer. I wanted to be this. I'm the guy that will buy everything. I didn't buy a sax, by the way. We'll buy something, and then like a week later, I'm just like it. There is a real thing about people with ADHD is like you get so excited about something and then you just give it up. And it was a massive pain for me. And there's only ever been a few things that I've kind of, that I've managed to stick at. And what I've learned is that, and I've said this a few times, is that purpose and that obsession. And DJing was one of them, like obsessed, and just when I'm DJing, it's like I'm like in a trance, literally in a trance. Like I'm completely in love with it, and I'll DJ for like 7 hours at a club to like thousands of people, and it will just feel like it's been an hour. And I think that it was the same with the events company, and it was just, it was very much the same with the early days of Cano. It's that obsession that sort of kept me going. So anyone with ADHD, like my main thing is like, as I've said like a few times, is that there's no point picking something that you aren't passionate about, because you will literally just give up after a year. Because being a founder and being an entrepreneur, there is very, very, very little glamour. And anytime that there is a glimpse of hope or glamour, 9 times out of 10, you're basically just pulled back to reality. So I think that, you know, if you have got ADHD and you are looking at doing something, just make sure that it's something that you're obsessed about, because, you know, I think that the superpower comes from that obsession. You find that superpower when you're like, when there's a problem, and I'm so good at this. When there's a problem, I watch everyone else around the room thinking about, oh my God, how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to deal with this? My mind, and I can't tell you how, this is 100% an ADHD thing. It just goes straight to the solution. And most people that hear that, they don't understand, as in like the people that are trying to think of the solution, that don't have ADHD or don't have the mind that I have, it's very, very difficult for them to understand that, like, that's not, you know, they instantly go to, that's not going to work without, you know, how can you get from A to D without doing sort of B and C? There's been so many times where, like, you just don't need B and C. Just scrap that and go straight there. There is 100% times where you need B and C. But like, I think that when it comes to the early days, there are so many things that can slow you down, and you don't need to get to Z. That's like one thing, but you can jump just by having this sort of ADHD mind. And, you know, some of the maddest shit that we did in the early days, it was all because of that, you know, creative ideas. And, you know, not when someone turns around and says you can't do that, it's like, no, you can do that. Just stop. Like, you can't do that. You know, I'm not going to, and I think it's like, it's the not letting the, like, you know, ironic, excuse the pun, it's like turning can'ts into cans. You know, it's like literally is that. So ADHD is 100% an enormous part of my journey. But within the past 10 years, it's been amazing and also horrendous. So, you know, which I'm very, very happy to talk about, because I'm actually, fun enough, 3 weeks in on ADHD medication, which is helping me, massively helping me. But at the same time, you know, it's the reason I started to take it was because, you know, I've researched it for a long time, and there are times where it's become really tough. So in the early days, it's when it's really found the lead and really like nitty gritty, it was just like, it was like being at, like, in a playground. But then when you actually need to run a business, that's where ADHD becomes really, really tough.
What do you mean by that?
Where you have to basically, where you're not doing like the most creative stuff every day, and you're having to, you know, look over the business and be a bit more strategic, or a bit more like the way that my mind works from an ADHD perspective is literally like a washing machine. It's like, imagine hearing 1,000 voices in your head and not knowing what to listen to. And you lose focus after literally 15, 20 minutes. And it's just, you've got like this brain fog that you just can't think through. Like, there'll be times where I'm just talking and I just can't even remember what I'm talking about, like these kinds of things. And I feel like when I'm getting like a real dopamine high, and I'm like running around London doing a guerrilla marketing stunt, or I'm at an event and I'm up all day, I'm fine. But when I'm sitting at a desk and I have to write a to-do list, and I've got to look after staff, and I've got to do this or that, and I've got to be sort of very, very focused without having any of that dopamine sort of hit, I melt down. And I hear this with so many people with ADHD, and it's really, really difficult. And it starts to actually go a bit backwards, that you're constantly looking for that dopamine hit, constantly. And people without ADHD will never understand this, because they kind of like, they can't fathom it. It's the same as like the addictive side. It's like if someone turns around and goes, but just stop. It doesn't work like that. Like, no one will understand the absolute obsession that makes someone who's ruining their family over and over and over again pick up that drink or a drug. And it's real. And I've sadly got both, okay? And I live with both. And I think that I've learned how to live with both. But, you know, in business, the two biggest things is get the best team around you. That's, I think, one thing. because, you've got ADHD and you've got incredible qualities, but find people that can do the things that you can't, and which most businesses need to do anyway, or founders, but it's massively important for people with ADHD because you're basically, every single day is a battle, every day. And I'll also say something about what I think triggers that as well in this day and age. And also the second thing is like you need to really learn why you're doing what you're doing. I think that's why I've gone into medication, because, I went onto medication as a kid and it didn't work for me. The person I am today is a completely different person. And people with ADHD, if you don't hydrate yourself constantly, and if you eat sugar, and if you don't go to the gym, your ADHD is just horrendous. Like, you have to do certain things to make sure that your ADHD is good. So the person I am today is a completely different person than I was. So the medication for me, and it's very early days and it's fascinating, but I've felt so different. I felt like I can focus. I felt like I can, and listen, I could be on a podcast in 2 weeks and I could be telling people that I'm fucked. But it's, I think that for me, like, forget the medication. For me, it's all about making sure that you're aware that you're the best version of yourself and not basically just going into a dark hole like a lot of people do. So the medication's irrelevant. That was just where I sort of landed at. But I think that so many people are just living in, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And actually, you just need to move forward. And, going back to what I mentioned about this ADHD thing, we live in a world where we're constantly looking at our phones. And, I think that this is a massive, massive, massive problem. And I'm horrendous. I'm terrible. I'm Netflix and chill when I get home. And, but we live in a world right now where everyone's getting diagnosed with ADHD. And actually, I believe that it's screen time that is triggering us. And I think that is just an enormous issue. And you know what, I can't preach because, like, I am just as bad, but I've spoken to quite a lot of people and I believe that is one of the biggest things. And I think that it really kind of is doing something to a lot of minds. So I think that, listen, as I said, like, today, every day is a battle for ADHD. And I think that is something that I urge people, find your hobby, find your purpose, try and get as much dopamine as possible, get to understand what makes you, like, keep going. It could be an ice bath, it could be going to the gym at lunchtime and getting back, but find that thing, because there have been times in 10 years within business that I felt really, really down, at times where I should have felt incredible, but it's a mind thing.
That segues quite nicely. Obviously, it feels like there's a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde situation going on. You've got this medicated guy now who can be super focused when it comes to, like, managing the team, but then you've also got this scrappy, disruptive
100%.
marketeer. I want to talk to you about the marketing side of things. Obviously, the early days, very scrappy, kind of the first guys to do it. Now you're being disrupted constantly. There's big brands coming over from America. So how do you continue to stay ahead of the curve and continue to disrupt when it comes to marketing?
Do you know what? My marketing view has changed so much after 10 years. And I think in this country, it's very different to America as well. Because I think in America, like, just add like 10 zeros to everything, whether it be raising money or marketing or whatever. I think when we started the business, everything was about being heard, and just doing crazy stuff. And I think we got heard, but at the same time, I think a lot of brands waste time and money doing certain things. And I think we did massively. But at the same time, I don't know if we would be here without doing those things. The past year has been a massive eye-opener. Brands have come over from, the US. We've got brands in the UK that are, canned water brands that are, doing everything in their power to remove us off of the shelves. I think that brand and product are the most important thing. This is where my head's at, which I think that marketing is a part of that. But I think that brand and how the brand looks, feels, talks, and acts is I believe one of the most important things. And I think that's one of the reasons that brands like Prime won't be around for 100 years. The product has to be phenomenal and the brand has to be brilliant. Now, I think that money is an enormous thing, but it's all when it comes to this, but it can confuse things, because just because you've got loads of money doesn't mean that you are a great brand. But there are brands that basically spend so much money and they pay to play, and it creates a bit of a false narrative. And I think that's what I've seen over the past 10 years. I've seen brands spend so much money, more money than us, run out of money, and then people aren't picking them up on the shelves and then they've gone. Whereas we've kind of like never had a lot of money. And we've just been building but we've always been so confident in the product and the brand and what it stands for. And a really good example of this is Liquid Death. I'm a massive fan of Liquid Death. I'm a massive fan of everything that they've done. I mean, they've we were around way before them, but they've created the most amazing. They've built the category, and I can't thank them enough, really, because the plastic people, there's nothing more that they'd want for that not to happen. But when they came to the UK, it was petrifying for us, Liquid Death. They had millions more money than us. They had, more people than us overnight. Like, they had everything more than us. And I had my staff basically saying to me, like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I mean, festivals were non-existent for us for the first time in our entirety, because Liquid Death were basically giving people stock constantly for free, and we didn't have the stock, we didn't have the money, and yeah, it was the first time really where we had seen like we actually might be in trouble. But I was so confident that Cano is Cano and Liquid Death is Liquid Death, and I was so confident that the UK consumer doesn't want that kind of brand. I like, when I said to you at the beginning, I'm obsessed with culture. Okay, the UK culture does not, like, we're not rockers, and we don't, we in America, and I've been to America many, many times, they are obsessed with that world. That is so American, it's like rock on and, fucking skulls everywhere. Like, it's perfect. We're not like that. We're just not like that. So when parents were turning up to uni open days and being given Liquid Death, like, that's not it. And if you just become a festival brand, which is what they did, or just a coffee shop brand for certain coffee shops, how are you going to build a global business? You build the best American business possible. And I think that, I had people messaging me the whole time, Liquid Death are going to, on LinkedIn, I've actually, I put it on LinkedIn. Someone said, like, Cano Water is going to be finished in a year, Liquid Death are here. Like, literally things like that, like the most insensitive, horrible things, like, I've had people around me sending pictures like Liquid Death's here, Liquid Death's here. They were spending millions, and within a year they pulled out. They pulled out of the UK. And, that goes back to my point about brand and product, is that you shouldn't have to spend millions of pounds to build a brand. I believe that when it's necessary, you do, but when it's very much you kind of learning and you growing, which takes many, many years. And don't get me wrong, some brands, they spend millions and they, they're an overnight success. But I think for us, it's like, the most important thing is making sure that it's like, where is the right place that Cano Water sells, and how do we expand that? We've spent too many years trying to be the product of everyone and everything, and you physically cannot. So, marketing for us, it used to be about turning up at a train station and just doing, like a guerrilla marketing stunt and like fucking with the plastic guys. And it still probably will be at times, like kind of what we've done in the past with Wimbledon and things like that. But what I've learned now is marketing is very much just learning about who is your consumer and where do you sell, and then basically going after that. And as a canned water brand, I'm not going to lie, it's really difficult. If we were a flavor or if we were an energy drink or whatever, you kind of go after, what audience to go after. With water, it's really, really difficult. And we've learned that, and we've spent a lot of money and made a lot of mistakes. And I think that, one day we will 100% go back to, I'll never be the guy that spends hundreds of thousands of, I'd never allow our brand to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on a sponsorship, which is never going to do that. I don't believe it. I've seen brands spend 300 grand on a festival, and it's just like, you're just like, why? But yeah, marketing for us is we protect our marketing budget, because you'll just spend it. You spend it in a day. I mean, like, if you think about why would I spend $1 million to £2 million on an F1 sponsorship when Cano is already, the water, behind the scenes for a lot of the teams. So it's like those kinds of things that, like, the product is there because that's the product that people want. That's the premium brand. If you want to go to a less premium brand, that's fine, but you're lowering the premium quality of the thing. And that's why Cano does very well in hotels, in sort of like upmarket hospitality places. And it's funny, when I got here this morning, I don't know if you guys knew this, I walked into the office here and literally in the fridge is all Cano. Like, for me, like, that's like so special. We don't pay for any of that. So I think marketing is something that I've learned about over many, many years. And I think that we've had people come into the business who are marketing experts who, like, they only know what to do by spending loads of money.
Yeah. And
I think that there is a time and a place for that, but not when you're small.
Sometimes less is more. Josh, I feel like we've only scratched the surface. I feel like we could sit here for about 5 hours and get into all of it. What does, before we leave, what does the future hold for Cano?
So, it's not easy running a drinks business. It's really, really, really hard. And if I could go back in time, I'm not 100% sure whether it would be drinks that I'd be going into. I think that if I was starting today, it probably wouldn't necessarily be drinks. Personally, it's a personal thing. I just think that it's such a difficult time in this country to start such a cash intensive business. When we started, entrepreneurial relief was 10 times higher, and there were so many more benefits. Whereas now it's really, really difficult. I think that we've got the brand now. The brand's 10 years in, and we continue to grow. I think the most important thing for us now is to look at future products, different developments. Whether that be different flavors or different can variants, different forms of aluminium. One thing that we will always be is we will always be aluminium, and we will always, hence the name Cano, and we will always be purpose-led. We will always go into things that resonate with the founder's story. So anything that you see from us in the future, it will be something that between myself, Ariel, and Perry truly believe in. And, whether that's around the ADHD side, the addiction side, these are things that within the Cano umbrella we've been working on that are really, really exciting. So, the future is exciting, but, it's funny. I don't ever I don't ever want to be looked at as a successful entrepreneur. And I can't explain it. I think it is definitely an imposter syndrome thing, because I still feel like it's still so early days. I can't explain it. I'm beyond proud. And sometimes I'll think about the journey and it will just be like a wave of emotion, you know. But at the same time, we're still grafting. We're still like a drop in the ocean. And also, like, we've still got a mission to get as many plastic bottles away from the planet. And the big plastic guys are stronger than ever. So it kind of feels like day one every day. And that is, that's also quite important for me. I heard someone talk about, like, fuck being humble. And I agree and I disagree. Like, I will always try and stay true to myself of trying to be, and I always will be, a very, very humble person, even though there have been times where I've had to make decisions where, I've maybe not. But I think that, for me, it is really, really important to just be true to myself and not ever have an ego of, like, you've made it, you're successful, because we have got a lot more that we need to accomplish in order to sort of add anything to the mission and the journey that we started.
Thank you for being so open and honest. I've loved this conversation.
Appreciate it.
If people want to find you, get in touch with you, buy a Cano, where can they get in touch?
So, like, you can find Cano in most high streets, or Amazon, Ocado, places like that. And then me, either on LinkedIn or my Instagram, Josh_White1, or Cano, just at Cano Water on any platform.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.